Chapter 11, The Art of Concluding Your Presentation, Making an Impact, by Ray Hall, Ph.D. I was reading one of my favorite publications the other day, the 2015 edition of the Old Farmer's Almanac. As one tracks the months of the year in that old and well-loved journal, there are quotes and other sayings that I look forward to reading throughout the highlights that are written about each month of the year. One saying caught my eye the other day as I was going through the month of November. It said, paraphrased, "A strong beginning is good, but a great ending is even better." I think that the unknown author was actually referring to life, but I almost immediately related it to public presentations. A good beginning to your presentation is important in order to grab the attention of your audience, but an even better ending will give the audience something to remember you and your message. A few days after your presentation, they will probably not remember how it began. But if you give them something in your concluding statements that makes an impact, then that is what they will remember and perhaps tell others. So the rule is, what you say last will be remembered best. Great endings, what not to do. Let's begin a discussion of great endings with some thoughts on what not to do when concluding your presentation. Sometimes it is better to learn how not to do something before learning how to do it correctly. Andrew Bradbury, in his book Successful Presentation Skills, gives 4 common errors that can occur when one comes to the conclusion of a presentation. 1. The emergency stop. Without warning, the speaker comes to an abrupt stop and says something such as, "Well, I think that's about all I have to say, so I'll stop there," and sits down. How can a speaker think that she or he has nothing more to say? Did the speaker not previously know that there is nothing more to say? If something was left out, the audience will never know. It should never be necessary to tell the audience that you have come to the end of your presentation. It should be evident by the way you have reached closure and made your final inspirational statements. By briefly rephrasing the points that you have made during the presentation and then giving a final statement that you want the audience to remember, you have then concluded. There is absolutely no reason to say something like, "Well, I guess that's all." The fact that you have concluded your speech should be self-evident and should make an impact. Then you can sit down while listening to the loud applause. 2. The endless maze speaker. The endless maze speaker can be recognized by the way she or he ends their presentation about as lost and confused as the audience. The speaker may say something like, "And so I'll conclude on that point, and remind you of the comment I made earlier about," and off the speaker goes again, apparently lost and trying to find a way out of the maze of the presentation by continuing on without arriving at a point where giving a concluding statement can appropriately be made. The speaker is obviously not working from a well-prepared script and hopes that if she or he talks long enough, all of the details of what was intended to be said will sooner or later find their way into the presentation. By that time, if it ever arrives, the audience will probably be asleep. 3. The Cliched Climax. Unlike the emergency stop, whereby the speaker seems to arrive at the ending of the presentation by accident, the Cliched Climax presenter obviously knows when she's going to finish and insists on broadcasting the fact. Conclusions such as, "In conclusion, here is what I came to say." Doesn't the audience already know what she came to say? Or, "Just before I leave, I want to say," or, "And finally," does that mean you are happy that you are about done? Or, "And I'd like to leave you with this final thought." It is though the speaker wants to prepare us for that awful moment when she or he will stop speaking. Ugh! 4. The more the merrier. Unlike the endless maze speaker, where the presenter keeps harking back to earlier comments and regurgitates them in so many words, when a more the merrier speaker reaches the end of a presentation, it is not an ending after all, but rather a new beginning. The process of summing up his ideas seems to generate a whole new series of thoughts that weren't there before. However, as Bradbury kindly states, the audience may not have the patience or the endurance to continue listening to what appears to be a new presentation that is found to be within the original presentation. Last-minute ideas, no matter how brilliant, should be saved for another day. The only way that those new ideas might be appropriate is if they are absolutely essential to the other points you were making. The key here is know when to stop. Our church once had a pastor who would continue to give his sermon until the digital clock in front of the choir, where I sat, was straight up and down 12 noon, the time when the service was to conclude. Our choir would sing the closing doxology and then, thinking the service was over, would begin picking up our music folders and other odds and ends ready to leave. However, the pastor would again walk to the altar and begin to give closing remarks, usually adding a new text and an additional message to what he had previously said during his lengthy sermon. The congregation would reseat themselves out of respect for the pastor and wait patiently while he continued to add new information to what he had already said during his sermon. We supposed that he wanted to make sure that we received his message, or perhaps he thought that his original sermon hadn't made enough of an impact. But the previously mentioned more the merrier add-on generally turned out to be a new mini-sermon that was a continuation of his previous sermon, and we would wonder if he was ever going to stop talking. Later that year, we thankfully received word that he would soon move to another parish. Now let's move to a successful finish to your presentation. Remember, audiences have sitting limitations. That is, they can only sit and be attentive for a limited period of time. For college-age students, it has been found that 20 minutes is the maximum amount of time during which one can expect to gain and hold their attention for purposes of learning new material. We all have sitting limitations. The pastor I just referred to seemed to have little sensitivity to the sitting limitations of the congregation. After an hour and a half, many were squirming in their seats because they had bathroom needs. Others were getting sore bottoms from sitting on hard wooden pews, and they needed to stand up for relief. Most had stopped listening 40 minutes prior to the time he concluded his sermon. He seemed to have no concept of the duration limits of an audience. Be aware of your audience's sitting limitations. To be assured that your audience is still alert and ready to receive the close of your presentation, you must be aware of their limitations. And it is also refreshing to know that few presentations fail because they ended early. If you can say everything you wanted to say in less than your allotted time, consider it a bonus. The audience will. Don't try to pad your speech just because you have not used up all of the time you were allotted. By concluding your presentation meaningfully in less than the time that was given to you, the audience will probably remember you and your presentation fondly. Make it a memorable ending. Too Good gives some sound pointers on ways to conclude your presentation in such a way that it is memorable and will leave a lasting impression. One is to summarize your key points. Summarize with perhaps one or at the most 3 main points. This means that you can restate your main message, then perhaps give 1 or 3 reasons or sub-themes to back it up, or simply restate your main theme and forget about the sub-themes. The best rule of thumb is to stick with one main message and leave it at that. You can restate it, in other words, but you are still stressing your original theme. For example, so our future, as you can see, lies in our own hands. It is not too late to correct our mistakes and to recognize that our success will depend upon. Number 2, loop back to the beginning. Similar to the suggestion above, one of the best concluding statements involves letting your ending echo the beginning of your presentation. This technique is not only intellectually satisfying, but also, in a design sense, aesthetically pleasing. And it can also save time in preparation. That is, because once you figure out what your theme is for the presentation, and you can synthesize that theme into simple but assertive language, then your theme can become not only your bottom line, your last words, but also your headline, your first words. So you can reach back to your beginning and pull up the personal story, illustration, quotation, or rhetorical question, and emphasize your initial point as you conclude your presentation. If it's a story, don't tell it exactly the same way during your conclusion, but retell it by reminding the audience of that little boy, that old man and his bit of philosophy, or the story of yourself when, with stars in your eyes, you began your career. 3. Ask the audience to do something. If you are giving a speech with the intent to inspire action by members of the audience, you might ask them to go out and spread the good news. Or if you are the senior corporate officer of a large company and are chairing a meeting of employees who are competing with each other within the same company, you might challenge them in the name of cooperation and ask for consensus. If you are requesting support for a civic project, you might ask for help, endorsement, ideas, cooperation, or donations. You are inspiring your audience to move forward in support of your efforts on behalf of your community. You are asking members of the audience to do something, and that is the motivation for your presentation. 4. Tell a story that embraces your theme. We are cautioned regarding this tactic for a conclusion to your presentation. Telling a story, if not done well, may hinder more than help. A story has to be told with conviction, not self-consciously or without feeling. If you use a story to close a presentation, it must be one that hits the mark exactly, doesn't take too long to tell, and makes a clear statement that will move an audience in such a way that it will strike an emotional chord in them. When the story has concluded, the most important thing for you to do is to sit down and be quiet. If there is applause, it will happen without your standing and appearing to beg. Adding a finish after a story has been told that stirs the emotions of the audience will subtract from its impact. Your purpose is to give your audience something that they will remember 6 weeks from the time you concluded your presentation. By telling stories and painting pictures for your audience, you are giving them something to take with them and that they will remember. Just remember to do it well. If you are not a good actor, you may not want to try the story finish. End with a purpose. Timothy Cagle, in his book entitled The Exceptional Presenter, emphasizes what I said earlier in this chapter. What you say last will be remembered best. We begin our presentations with a purpose. We can conclude our presentation with a restatement of our purpose, but perhaps in slightly different words. That tactic can conclude a presentation effectively. Because the purpose statement may provide 1, 2, or 3 key points that you want your audience to remember, concluding with the same key points can give them what you want them to take home with them. Use your purpose statement to hammer home your key points one final time. For example, something like, if there are no further questions, keep in mind that the destiny of this organization is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of choice. The choices we make in the next few weeks will. That's a wonderful way to conclude your presentation. The point or points that you want the audience to remember are the ones that conclude your remarks. Keep in mind that 90% of what you say in the body of your presentation will be forgotten by the end of the day. Make sure that your conclusion stays with your audience and is not forgotten. It may very well be the most powerful component of what you say. Additional avenues for a successful conclusion. Bradbury gives us some additional suggestions on making a suitable closing for your presentation. He refers to the following: the challenge. Give your audience a challenge to address a problem. Couch the challenge in terms of what we can do or will do, not what we should do. Should do refers to something that we might do if we have time, not that we absolutely need to do it now or even later. A mere emotional appeal for some action may be rousing to the audience, but it is likely to lead to nothing in regard to action. The call to action. In regard to a call to action rather than a challenge, it may be better to use persuasion to make your point. Your concluding statements may then be more effective if you confine them to the points in favor of a proposal and then end with a description of the next steps that those in the audience are to take. You have probably already covered the contradictory arguments during your presentation, so there's no reason to reiterate them here in your concluding statements. The author uses an example of a strong call to action that was used as the climax of a political rally when the party leader challenged his followers, "Go home and prepare to live successfully," and the challenge was found to be successful. The feel-good factor. Motivational speakers aim to leave the audience with a warm glow rather than proposing some other course of action. Of course, the feel-good conclusion proposed here would not be appropriate in something like a press conference or a political rally. The three most popular forms of a feel-good ending make use of a quotation or a piece of poetry or a story that has a happy ending. In all cases, according to Bradbury, the material should be short and to the point. As long as the material is highly emotionally charged, the precise nature of the quotation or poem or story will be determined by the emotional response you wish to arouse in your audience. However, it should be dictated by the content of the presentation in order to solidify the points you are making. Again, give the audience something they can take away with them and remember you by. Remember the red light. When the red light goes on, then be ready to conclude your presentation. The red light doesn't have to be an actual red light, but it should be implanted indelibly in your mind and your watch. When that red light comes on, don't look startled. You should have at least two possible conclusions to your presentation, one that you present at your leisure and one to present when the red light goes on. If you plan your presentation in such a way that you can conclude your presentation at your leisure, then there is no problem. If you have to end your presentation in 45 seconds, then you need an alternative, something short and sweet. Well, perhaps not sweet in relation to sweet and sugary, but something catchy and thought-provoking, or a challenge to your audience that will move them to action. Any concluding remarks should take no longer than 2 to 3 minutes. Otherwise, the audience may compare you to that pastor I referred to earlier in this chapter. A statement that will conclude what you came to say and offer a thought-provoking challenge or offer the audience a bit of advice that they can take with them can do wonders. It will do more to cause an audience to remember you and your presentation fondly than a conclusion that does not seem to end or seems to have little to do with what your presentation contained. A final word to the wise presenter. Most of all, when you are concluding your presentation, walk to the front of the stage and talk directly to members of the audience. Look directly at as many as you can and speak conversationally to them, not dogmatically, nor in an overtly dramatic manner. By conversationally, I mean to speak to them as though you are carrying on a personal conversation with each of the members of the audience. They will remember you as a personable and honest presenter, a personable and honest person whom they look forward to hearing speak again.